there's some cool features in there that folks I don't think are aware of, and that light up some features also in Visual Studio for you that I want to go through and make sure you're aware of and that you can use to their fullest. And my laptop is chiming at me every few seconds here that it's changing devices. That's nice. No idea what that is, but I had this exact same problem yesterday and it continues. I think it's my mouse. All right. In 4.6.2 and 4.7, we introduced a number of features for ASP.NET that should make it easier for you to start to scale your application and for you to use session and output caching a little bit better. I'm not going to dig in and show you these features, but I want you to be aware of them. There are additional providers for session and output cache that work with SQL Server and work with them using asynchronous connections. This means that when you go to save your output cache using that SQL Server provider and you want to persist it so it's not just in memory on the one web server, but it's in a shared memory out on SQL Server, it will now do that asynchronously for you. That's great because now, right, you serve back the data, right, your rendered angle brackets and curly braces. Folks are able to see that, use that, and at the same time it's being persisted over in SQL Server, and you don't really care about how long it takes to come back. SQL Server Session Provider, we also enhanced so you no longer have to do that, that ASP.NET Reg SQL statement. Okay, we now allow concurrent requests by session ID by default. So instead of having that reader-writer lock that you would get when you would interact with session on SQL Server, that's been lifted. Okay, it's going to get a read lock only by default. You can put it back to the old behavior if you'd like, but what this means is that on pages where you have multiple things that are requesting data from your web server, instead of it blocking for each one of those widgets or endpoints that need to fetch session data, they'll all interact at the exact same time because we're not blocking access to session. You can also throttle your concurrent requests per session ID. So there's documentation out there for those things. It's nice. It's just a session provider that you have to up with a little bit of configuration, and it'll work for you and make your application easier to use. So that's available, and you can add on to .NET Framework starting in 4.6.2 that those providers are available. Now, what I want to show you, I want to start with something called configuration builders. Configuration builders is something that we introduced in .NET Framework 4.7.1. Now, if you've seen some of the things that we can do with .NET Core, you know that we can take our configuration in .NET Core and we can receive configuration from 3 different places by default, from the command line, from an app settings JSON file, or from environment variables. That's nice in .NET Core, but if I want to interact and get that same behavior in .NET Framework so that I can deploy to the cloud and get environment variables configuring my application, or maybe I want to use user secrets, right? Or I want to use some other behavior, then I'm actually going to want to do some other configuration to load into my application. Well, I can load those other configurations and write some code so that instead of getting from Configuration Manager, I go get from over here. But that means you need to rewrite all of your code that interacts with Configuration Manager, and that's a pain in the neck, right? Who wants to go through their code and rewrite every place that they touch Configuration Manager app settings? So we added this capability that you can drop into webconfig for a 4.7.1 and later project. This is a 4.7.2 project, you can see here. And I'm targeting 4.7.2. You can actually just change your target to a later framework, and this will work for you. And what I've done is I have added, where is it? Oh, I'm sorry, I grabbed the wrong project. Wrong sample. Wrong sample. It is this one. I've got like 5 different sample projects we're going to be looking at today. There we go. All right. So I have inside my web config, there we go. Right, so there I'm targeting with my runtime 471. So this is going to run on the .NET 471 framework. And I've added a config sections element here that references the configuration builder section, okay? This allows .NET Framework to recognize, oh, I use configuration builders to enhance the configuration manager that comes in system.configuration namespace. My configuration builders section, I've named config builders. That's the name I gave it. So it has this exact same XML element over here. And then I can define builders using the builders element and the same add, remove, clear syntax that I'm used to in web config or app config. In this case, I've actually written my own here that reads from environment variables and will apply wherever I have the environment config builders tag. So I've already placed it right here on my app settings. I'm going to delete that so that you can see this. I have by default a service ID and a service key and these values listed here. If I run my application, now let me show you where I'm going to dump that value. On my default page, I'm just doing a for each over the app settings and outputting key value pairs so you can see what's in there, right? So let's start this and we should see the exact same values get output inside of my default ASPX. Whoops. You think I what? No, that's fine. Okay. Let's do this. Let's make sure we have all of our NuGet packages. Oh, I have never seen that error. Oh my God. Some security. All right. Wow. No, that's not going to run. All right, so there's something misconfigured on this. Great. Wow. Where do I want to go here then? Give me 1 second here. Let me look at that. Is in this web project, so I should still be able to run my other project. No. Oh no. Is this project going to work? Okay, that one worked. All right. Yeah, I know. I closed it before we started. Okay. All right. So this isn't configured properly. There's something wrong with this machine that's preventing this from loading. What I wanted to show you is you can add these configuration builders and they will swap out wherever you have a config builders element attribute assigned, like that, and it'll replace the contents that match those environment variables. So I've written this very simple environment config builder over here, right? These inherit from, in this case, I'm inheriting from key value config builder. And I'm able to say, go get the environment variables for a certain key, right? When it wants to go fetch a value for a key, or I can go get all the values, and we actually manage prefixes as well. And you can apply those appropriately when they match, and it'll replace the values inside of your configuration section. We have a Oh, look at this. I've even got Docker running in the background downloading. Wonderful. We have a collection of configuration builders available to you out on GitHub. If I go github.com/ I believe it's ASPNET, right? Microsoft configuration builders. Not that one, it's on .NET. There it is. So there are a collection of these available that will do interactions and load data for you from different locations. So there's one that's available that'll do environment variables. There's one that'll do user secrets. So you can save a user secrets XML file elsewhere on disk, and we'll load up those configuration settings and replace them in webconfig for you. We can also pull from Azure Key Vault so that you can take all of your settings, put it in Key Vault, and then not even think about what connection string I'm using, what keys I'm using to connect to Twitter or my Microsoft account authentication. Put these all in here and then apply it to your app settings or connection strings, and it'll automatically replace appropriately. Key per file is a simple config builder that uses directory files as a source of values. So this is a little bit interesting for folks that want to have things like Docker secrets. It'll be able to load and read that configuration for you. You can also read from JSON and load it up. These are NuGet packages that you can use and add to your project. Add them to your project, and then you're able to, you don't even need to recompile. You just reference the type here inside of your web config, and it'll start to replace those values for you. The goal here was we don't want you to need to recompile your project. It should allow you to just continue using Configuration Manager and work with configuration the exact same way that you have been. Now, I took this idea and actually went a step further. And out on GitHub, if you want to check out my repository, I actually wrote my own configuration builders so that you can read from any files. Because who doesn't like to put configuration back into 1996 and read from any files? Because XML is a pain in the neck and nobody wants to write in JSON. We like any files. You can do that. I have any file that you can use and you can work with instead of those different formats. RSS feeds. So you can actually have a server that publishes an RSS feed, and you can have your configuration. Think about this. Put this in an app config file on a Windows Forms or a WPF application, and you can have it read configuration from an RSS feed and update configuration of all of your organization's applications. That's pretty cool, right? How about YAML files? So maybe you're the other way. Maybe you don't like any files, that's so ancient. We don't like XML because who likes angle brackets? And JSON is just too much markup because it's got curly braces and colons and all these things. I want YAML files so that I am looking at a space-dependent formatting language. You can do that. I've got a YAML configuration builder that will read YAML files and apply them to your configuration appropriately. It's up to you. You can build these out and add additional format handlers for whatever needs you might have. The idea was we want to make configuration extensible and not locked into just what's inside the web config file. We want to be able to read and parse content from third-party sources that aren't necessarily another XML file. So you have that capability now with configuration builders. Now the next demo, I think, if I have this right, yes, dependency injection, the one that I started trying to opening at the beginning of this. Let's go back and let's look at dependency injection. And you're going to say to me, well, we already do dependency injection. We already know what this is. I already know how to work with that in MVC, Web API, and SignalR. That's right, you do. And it works great in .NET Core. What about web forms? You can do dependency injection in web forms. Check this out. So inside of global ASAX, I have Unity config configure down here. If I jump down into that, Here. So this is an iService provider, okay? This is a new model that we have, a new interface that we have available to you starting in 4.7.2 that provides the, right, it provides the get service interface so that you can tell it, here's how to resolve various types. So my configure method here creates the Unity container. I'm a normal Microsoft Unity container. I register a type with it. In this case, I have a product repository interface with a concrete product repository object. It's all right here, right? Product, iProduct repository, product repository that returns just two simple products. But you might use this however you like. And then I set web object activator equals a new one of these things. So it knows how to do the resolve. Now that's pretty cool. And I can now use this to inject that iProduct repository. Now, if I remember correctly, I have it here on my default page. So look at that. I have a web form that receives an interface, and it will properly receive, instead of that interface, the concrete product repository that does the same thing. So I'll start this project. And of course, it's web form, so it takes a little bit to compile and run. You're kidding, right? Okay. Come on, this must be a joke. I mean, come on. Let's start without debugging so we can jump right into this. All right, hang on. IIS Express looks like it's taking a powder here on me. Kill that. Kill this. We're good there. One more time. Start without debugging. Okay, let's restart Visual Studio. Something's not configured quite right there. Or you know what? I'll even go to this one. So I know it's using a completely different files. Bug fixes. So that's something that I know is being worked on, but it's not. Dev, sample dependency. Okay. There we go. Wow. Oh my gosh. Do I go to the backup machine at this point? Okay. I'm just about ready to it. There's a reason why I have a backup machine here. Tell you what, I'm going to start talking about .NET Standard 2.0 support as I set up the backup machine. So I'm going to go back to that 4.7.1 project and show you that starting with .NET Framework 4.7.1, we brought along .NET Standard 2.0 support. So when you have a new project that uses .NET 4.7.1 or later, it now, out of the box, has support for .NET Standard, and there it is. It just comes along for the ride and makes things available that will be compatible with both .NET Core, Xamarin, and .NET Framework. And this is really the framework that we want you to use in order to build applications. We want you to build applications using .NET Standard so that right? That class library that you're going to construct and you're going to work with will start to be compatible, so that when you do say, you know what, this MVC application that we've been working on, I want to migrate it and work on .NET Core. I want it to work inside this iPad app that we're building, and my boss wants running, you know, so they can view numbers from accounting, right? Or the insurance company wants to do whatever. We want you to be able to have that flexibility as you're building applications. I'm going to make sure that this builds first before I switch machines. So, I mean, look at this. I'm dictating and configuring another machine at the same time. So .NET Standard now comes in the box, and in this solution, this set of samples that I have here, I actually have, I believe it's this one. Yeah. So this is a library that targets .NET Standard and just has, oh, you kidding me. Fortunately, that sample is over here. And we are going to go over here now. My wife criticizes me because I bring backup machines. Like, why do you need backup machines? Doesn't it just work on your machine? I said, well, sometimes things go wrong. Oh, please, why would things go wrong? Guess what? Things go wrong. Right? I know. So here's the thing. I was up early this morning and I tested everything and it was working just fine on this one. Yeah, okay. All right, we're going to switch machines. Because that's how I roll. Yeah. So it's going to adjust. Now we're getting this one loaded up there. I'm going to close some of this other stuff that I have. Let me change that to the bright view. Then we'll rerun this. Just boot. There we go. All right. So I have this library down here called standard text. I didn't try to move it. There it is. So this is just doing some simple text manipulation, but it's doing it using .NET Standard capabilities. So add string to the end of a string, and it's throwing an argument null exception appropriately. You know, it's just doing some simple string manipulation, but it's doing an append to a string, right? Instead of some sort of a concatenate. Okay, that's fine. And now I'm able to reference and use this exact same thing, right? Inside of here's a .NET Core project, and here's a .NET Framework project that both reference, right? So there's .NET Standard, here's my standard text project. They both reference and use the exact same thing. So I have a collection of strings here, @coat jacket, and I can add strings to the beginning and to the end, and this just does its thing. So here's the .NET Framework version. I will debug and start. And I get a collection of items that have been added. So I started with hat, coat, jacket, and I prepended and appended at the end. So the point here is we want you to start using .NET Standard for your class libraries. Start taking your class libraries that you currently have, try converting them and see if they work. But there are other things that you can look at and you can say, well, you know what? Doesn't necessarily, I don't necessarily have the source code for something here. What do I do? If you don't have the source code, we have a shim that you can use to still get things working with .NET Standard. Check this out. This is a project that compresses files. So I want to be able to use that old way that we used to compress files back in the day. Back before .NET 3.5, we needed to go and compress files, right? You didn't have system.io.compression. You had to go through IC#ziplib. And there it is, okay? This assembly hasn't been touched since 2010. So how do I use that? How do I continue to work with that assembly? Because you might have the exact same problem at your place of business, right? You have that assembly, that library that has all the business logic that Skippy from accounting wrote back in 2008. And Skippy was into investing in real estate, and in 2008 was doing good, decided to leave the company, and who knows where he went in 2010 when the bottom dropped out. You know what I'm saying? The fact of the matter is you don't have Skippy's source control. You just have this DLL, and the folks in operations say, don't touch it. They have that golden copy that they copy around from server to server, and it's that DLL that has the accounting business logic, and you don't mess with it. You've thought about trying to decompile it, but it's a pain in the neck, so we just don't mess with it. Same type thing here. I can write a console app and reference, right, all kinds of things here that target .NET Standard, and it will attempt to use that exact same library to compress and work. And this is .NET Framework targeting this little compression library that wraps IC#ziplib, right? IC# code, #ziplib, right? So it will compress and deliver those files. Well, now .NET Core, right? If I look at the assemblies, it's referencing #ziplib, and it's referencing my compressor library that's now a .NET Standard library that wraps the access to that DLL. And it just works. It does the things that I need it to do, okay? So inside of my, all right, let me go to that sample zip folder. Right, I'll delete this zipped files. I have a folder here of files to zip. I don't know who that guy is. Look at the hair. Ooh. I can run the .NET Core version of this that references that exact same one. It's going to reach down into that files to zip folder and compress it. And now I get a folder with the exact same. Okay? So the point here is start migrating and using .NET Standard. It comes in the box with your .NET Framework 4.7.1 and later versions of the framework. You can add it on as a NuGet package to older versions of the framework. Try to make things move in that direction so that you can keep up with and eventually migrate to the other .NET frameworks. All right, now I'm completely off because I don't have my slides. Let's see, it might still be on. Oh, you know what? Saved them to OneDrive. I should be able to still get to them. There it is. Save the day. We've got about 20 minutes left, right, Rich? Rich Ross helping us out with the stream. Thanks so much. Now, you want to figure out what you can put into .NET Standard. We have a portability or analyzer that you can run against your application. It's an extension that you can download inside of Visual Studio. And I believe there it is. I've already got it installed. .NET Portability Analyzer. You can go and you can find that, put it into your project, and then what you're able to do inside of Solution Explorer is right-click, and then you will see Analyze Project Portability, Analyze Project Portability with project references and settings. Drill into those settings, and you can look at all the different versions of the .NETs that you could possibly want to target. So all of the .NET Core versions, .NET Core and Platform Extensions, all of the .NET Framework versions. .NET Standard, we want to check to see if we work with .NET Standard 2.0. I'll turn that one off. I don't need 1.0. There's .NET Standard with Platform Extensions, ASP.NET Core. Let's make sure it works with 2.0. Mono, Silverlight? Is anybody still trying to get stuff to work with Silverlight? Really? 1 or 2 people in the room. Okay, that's cool. It's all right. That's Windows Phone, Silverlight. Xamarin and Xamarin for iOS. You can check to see if it's compatible with all of those things. And what it's doing is it's actually going to check which APIs you reference and then report back what those APIs are that may or may not work. Now, I'm not sure why it's called dev intersection report, considering it's nothing here is called dev intersection. But here is the list of all those different frameworks I said for it to check and whether the APIs that I'm using are available in those different frameworks. So I can look at the details and it will show you exactly what is supported and isn't supported in those frameworks. And you can start to figure out how you need to rewrite your packages, your libraries, so that it will work appropriately for the various frameworks you may want to target. Or you may want to deprecate. You may say, you know what, we can't support Silverlight anymore. We're going to stop building that. Instead, we're going to do .NET Standard and Blazor, and we'll use that as our delivery mechanism instead. So that's a little bit about the portability analyzer. Live unit tests. This is easily my favorite feature inside of Visual Studio. Now this comes with the Visual Studio Enterprise SKU. Let me find one here. You know what? I'm gonna grab this project. I'm gonna grab my core wiki project. This is a project I'm currently working on my Twitch stream. Folks out there that are watching on Twitch, hello. You know that I've been working on my core wiki project, and I don't have the very latest version of Visual Studio loaded. Which one is it? I thought I had. Okay. It's got to be this platform. Holy crow. Who knew? I think it's the mouse. There we go. I usually have 2 versions of Visual Studio installed. So the Visual Studio installer now. Thanks. Thanks a lot. That's great. Half the time that I open it, it wants me to apply updates to itself. It's like, couldn't be doing this while I was running Visual Studio. But I normally have multiple versions. I do. I have the preview version here. Color coding the Visual Studio icons. Well, yeah, look, I've got this one and I've got the blue one. I used to have 8 Visual Studios installed, okay? Because I had Visual Studio Code Preview, Visual Studio 2017, Visual Studio 2017 Preview, Visual Studio 2015, 2013, 2012. Out of Visual Studio. I've cut back to just 4 now, okay? All right, so now I'm on the preview version, so I should have all the goo that I need. Oh, now installer decides to finish running. Thanks. I'm gonna, yeah, thanks, now you finish. All right, so I do have 15.8 here. That is this one, good. Let me open Core Wiki over here. Now, this is a .NET Core project, but the feature is the same that I want to show you. Live unit testing allows you to continue building, to continue working on whatever it is that you're working on inside of your project, and it will run tests as the files change. So if I go up here to test, I can choose live unit testing, start, and this will work for both .NET Core and .NET Framework projects as long as you have unit tests inside your solution. And I have it down here in my Solution Explorer, way down at the bottom. You see there, corewiki.test. And what will happen, now that I turned on the live unit testing, You see it's already run my unit tests in the background here, and I've got all greens because my tests passed. So let's go over here to, this is a create, let's see. I'm going to find a test here, and let me just show you that I'm going to break it, right? Let's change this from assert null to assert not null. I'm not even going to save it, okay? And it should rerun that test in the background and update for me, right? My unit tests are running, right? Yeah. I notice I'm not getting the entries in the gutter here. Should be a series of checkboxes that appear. Taking its time getting run. There they go. There they go. Used by another process. What? Clean that. Because you're having this running in the background all the time, sometimes it trips over itself when it first starts. Should get my entries now. Here it comes. Build succeeded. There goes my test. Get a little clock that indicates that which tests are running, because it runs them actually in parallel. There we go. Now I got the red, and I should see exactly which line pops up in my code here. I get the little red X inside of my header information right here. And it's not going to show me the indicators from live unit testing. Restart. There we go. Now I'm getting the indicators. So you see the little flask here. It indicates this area is being covered by a test. The checks indicate that a test ran and covered this line. And in the background, you see the little thing here. It's running tasks in the background. There we go. Did it crash? I think you're right. Check the test output pane for details. Finished executing tests. Yeah, it had an error, right? And it's because this changed. And it should rerun the tests. Oh. So let's see. Pause that. Fine. We'll rerun the test. Back on. Started executing test, finished executing tests, because I changed that now. If I go back, right, it's showing me which line's executed. If I make this not null, without saving, you can see by the little clocks there, it reran without me even saving the file. All right, now we got it synced up and running. So I can delete that and it'll rerun and everything works. So imagine as you're writing code, you've already got great unit tests out there. You're fixing a bug. You're going to write a unit test that exposes that bug in your code. And then as you're writing the code to fix it, you'll know when you're finished and it works, because you'll get these green checks down the side and it'll show in your test explorer that your tests all passed. Okay? That's live unit testing. I want you to start using that with .NET Framework projects so that you know you've got that insurance policy. You know that these things work great inside of Visual Studio with your project. All right. Editor config and code style. Yeah, let's show that real quick. So inside of your project, and you know what, I'm going to use Core Wiki here. Even though this is .NET Core, it works in .NET Framework as well. You can add to your solution a .editor config file. Now, we've all got some sort of a standard that we want to use with the folks on our teams for here's how we write code. Here's how we format our code. Here's how we present our code. .editor config is a standard format that folks use. It's something that has been available out on the net. Let me open Firefox and show you. Because this is available on so many editors out there, text editors, right? This is not something Microsoft invented. And there's very simple format here. There you go. It works on all these editors, okay? It even works on GitHub. You can apply this so that you can start to enforce whatever code formatting you want in your project. Like, of course, we all want our indent style to be tabs, not spaces. You can do that. You can set that here in this file, right? And I can also specify appropriate formatting for other files, right? So we know YAML files are space sensitive. They're not looking for tabs. It's spaces that YAML files look for to ensure and to give that level of capability, right, for their hierarchical syntax. So YAML files, when we hit indent, right, we hit tab, we want to deliver spaces, not tabs. Same thing with F# source files. It's space sensitive, so you need to use spaces instead of tabs. This will drive now how Visual Studio interacts with your code. And we've added some extensions appropriate for C# or .NET naming so that you can enforce those rules on your projects as well. These are extensions that are available to use inside of Visual Studio. We have tools that will enforce that, and this will also work in Visual Studio Code so that you can enforce those rules and have a great experience inside the editor. The other editors that don't support this will just ignore these rules, right? So if somebody opens this in IntelliJ IDEA or inside of Rider, right? If Rider doesn't understand it, I don't know about that. It just will ignore these silently. And you can download plugins for some other editors as well. Atom, Sublime, Brackets, right? So that's what's in editor config, but wouldn't it be great if I could just use a visual tool to define those? So there is, if you search inside your options up here, there is a code style entry underneath of each one of the languages, and you can actually set these values here. And Visual Studio will start to enforce those. And then you can go into your project, right click, and you can add a new, where is it? Add new item. And you can add an editor config file here. Come on, Jeff. There it is. Now there's .NET that'll have some predefined defaults for .NET. A default one that's kind of empty and has a couple of the simple things like indent type. Then there's this one, editor config file IntelliCode. This is very cool. It'll generate settings for you based on the current code in the selected folder or project. So these editor config files are hierarchical. Depending on what folder they're in, they apply to all the projects underneath of it. So you could put different configuration, if you'd like, inside of that .NET Standard library, inside of that Xamarin iOS application that's specific to how you interact there. But with this choice, we'll actually go and use machine learning to figure out, well, how are you formatting your code? And we will generate appropriate settings for you based on the project you're adding it to. That's pretty smart, isn't it? Right? That makes now enforcing it a little bit better, because I code perfectly, you should too. So I'm going to use this, infer my perfect code standards, and force everybody else to do the same thing. Not bad. Now, inside these settings, notice, right, I've specified here's the different configuration. C# use var for built-in types. Yes, everybody should use a var for a built-in type that you're referencing. And if you don't, I want it to throw an error, right? This is something you can configure in that user interface, but I can also specify here. Oh, come on, give me the IntelliSense. Yes, true. And then it should give me, nope. Don't have it popping in. There we go. You can specify error, you can specify warning, you can specify the different levels that you want it to raise, right? By making it an error, it'll actually fail compilation, right? So let me go back to that unit test. Right, I'm going to close this so I don't break it. But here's my unit test. See, I have var result. The onGet async returns a task of iAction result. If I make this explicitly iAction result, watch what happens here. Get a red squiggle. Defines a contract, use var instead of explicit type, right? And I kind of get forced to say, here's the fix, change that to a var, and it replaces it for me. So that's a tooling thing that comes in Visual Studio. It helps to make your code easier, simpler for other folks on your team to interact with. I am right out of time, aren't I? All right, let me give you the slide for the resources for everything that's new that's happened inside of .NET Framework. There we go. Trust me on this. Brought to you by the Kalahari. There we go. So, .NET Framework 4.7 announcement. You can find out more about what features were added in .NET Framework 4.7, bit.ly/netfx 4.7. ASP.NET 4.7.1 dependency injection. There's a blog post out there that'll show you exactly how to do that. Blogs, msdnmicrosoft.com. Search for it. You'll find it'll be easier than copying that whole thing down. On Twitter, we're .NET, we're ASP.NET, and we're Visual Studio. Okay? I went through that a lot. I apologize for some of the technical difficulties. This is why I have a backup machine, right? So, my name is Jeff Fritz. That's my email address if you need to contact me, and a really old picture of me. I don't know who that young guy is now. I am C# Fritz on all the social medias, including the Twitch. Thanks so much, everybody online that's watching. We've got another session coming up soon. Thank you so much, TechBash, for having me.